You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Captivate, and Apple Podcast.
Now, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith without doubting. For the doubter is like the surging sea, driven and tossed by the wind. The person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded and unstable in all his ways. Here, James is in the middle of writing about trials everyone must face in life. He writes that we need to turn to God for wisdom in our trials, and that our trials will build our faith. So after this verse, James even warns the reader not to attribute any temptation that they face to God. This verse seems to be condemning doubts we have in our struggles. Pastor Gregg Hoffman, do you think the author's intent here is truly to tell the readers to continue on to what's next without any doubts?
Well, thanks for the question. Certainly wish that I had been able to ask the author personally, but I would say that a lot of what James is doing throughout his letter is trying to encourage people to practice their faith, to put it into practice. A big part of that is not allowing doubts to have some sort of triumphant word, any sort of way that God's will is insufficient. And so I don't think it's so much saying have no doubt, but maybe more don't allow doubt to be the thing that guides you. Move forward with the doubt and trust God to show up the way God always does.
Yeah, I like that. All right, guys, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast. We are here today with a very special, fun episode. We're going to continue in our series, the What's Next, our After series. We're going to be asking what's next after marriage. Marriage isn't the end goal necessarily. So we're going to be talking about what it's like as far as what marriage is in the context of our church and what do we do after marriage. Yeah, so it'll be a fun one. And we're joined by two, I consider two of my pastors. I go to their church whenever I'm not working on Sundays, which is most Sundays. But Pastor Gregg and Pastor Rachel Hoffman, welcome to the show. It's great to have you guys.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And of course, we're also joined by the founder of podcasts, the one whose essence, he actually didn't do any work to create podcasts. Just by his essence, podcasts ended up being made. Yeah. The one and only TJ, Tiberius Juan, Blackwell. How's it going, TJ?
Oh, good, thanks.
Yeah.
So, also check out the Onazam Ministries Podcast Network. The website link is below for shows that we are aligned with, not necessarily in oneness with, but we know them. We're friends. And if you're already listening, if you're listening on AMP Network YouTube channel, like and subscribe, or else.
Why is it always or else?
We're keeping track.
Okay. You have names?
Yeah, extensively.
Okay. So you guys might know one of my favorite forms of unity is a sacramental practice of silliness, where we like to usually we start our show off with a silly question, but for this series we've been doing a silly story. And what we're gonna do with two of you, I'm gonna start off the story and let you guys one sentence at a time alternate to finish our silly story for today. So here it goes, the series story. Once upon a time, TJ was playing ping pong against a sea turtle on board a steam engine train when he, all right, Rachel,
swung wildly at the ball and missed.
It's tragic, yeah.
Fortunately, the ball was retrieved by a pelican.
The pelican, however, not quite understanding ping pong, just started nibbling on that ping pong ball.
Does this go back to y'all, or do we just keep
going? Oh, you guys just let us know when you're done.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I like it. So far I'm here for it.
I just didn't want to step on anybody else's turn.
Yeah.
All right, so pelican ate the ball, or
nibbled.
Started to. TJ said, "Hey, fella, That's not some sort of jawbreaker.
And the sea turtle said, "Give that back, it's my turn."
The pelican, lacking the capacity for speech, did eat all.
Tragic.
And unfortunately, there were no more balls on that train.
That is unfortunate.
It's always tough when the sea turtle can speak and the pelican can't.
I was just more concerned with, I feel like the pelican maybe had kept you from losing the game. Sounds like you weren't doing so hot.
Yeah, I paid him.
All right. Yeah, that checks out.
I didn't want the loss on my record.
Right.
So moving on to some of the more serious parts of today's discussion. We're talking about marriage. So first things first, would you guys mind kind of letting us know how you met, what led to you guys getting married, and what it's like doing ministry together now?
Yes. Do you want me to start or you to start?
You go right ahead.
Okay. Well, we met in seminary. We were both in the same class, and we were at the Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary in Columbia, South Carolina. And the class size there was quite small. So we had all of our classes together, met on the first day of school, orientation day. And we were good friends through that first year and into the summer is called CPE, the chaplain.
Clinical Pastoral Education.
That's what it was. You go to work in a hospital, and we kind of supported each other through that on via text and phone because we were quite a ways away. You were interested in me.
True.
And it took me a little while to figure it all out.
Also true.
So we were friends for about a year and a half before we started dating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we did get married before finishing seminary. That was a way that we could continue in our relationship, but also it would allow us to continue in ministry together. And so after getting married and finishing senior year, we were assigned to Region 9, which is basically the Southeast. It's Virginia down to Florida and over to basically the Mississippi River. So just the whole Southeast there. And we were in Arden, North Carolina, just south of Asheville for 2.5 years. And then we've been in Rock Hill, South Carolina since.
Yes.
Nice. I realized I didn't say earlier, but hopefully the listeners picked up on, they are part of the Lutheran Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, because I know you mentioned the seminary, and their church is Grace Lutheran Church here in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I say here, I'm in Lancaster, but it's close enough. My favorite breweries are in Rock Hill, so yes. I feel like I live in Rock Hill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. So we've been doing ministry together for about 8 years now. Just crossed the 8-year mark of being ordained.
Nice.
Yep.
Sweet. Big party?
No.
You didn't celebrate the ordination day? Oh. Man.
No, I think we were in the midst of the end of the school year, wrapping up programming and getting ready for the summer.
I suppose we would have been.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So this series, our What's Next series, started off as kind of a joke because we were running out of ideas for the show, and we just said we're going to ask a bunch of guests what we should do next. So we've talked to church leaders from a bunch of traditions and ethnic backgrounds. We've spoken to people from all over the world. We've done series on church offices, worship styles, all kinds of stuff. What do you guys think we should do next?
Well, I am not sure if you've done this before, but I think campus ministry is an interesting topic. There are all kinds of different campus ministries. We at Grace have one called Welcome, the Winthrop Ecumenical Lutheran Campus Ministry. And I think it's a great program. A lot of times students graduate high school and then head off to college, not where they're from. And so they don't have church homes where they go. But campus ministry is a great place to find a community in your faith and have kind of a home away from home in that way.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
Yeah. Fun story. I was part of 3 different campus ministries when I went to college.
Oh.
He's great.
Well, the Catholic one, because they gave us free pizza and breakfast. And I just couldn't say no to free food. And then one was Crew, which was so large. I never really I'm too introverted to get connected in Crew. And, and back then I was more evangelical. So I was fine with a lot of the stuff they were saying. I say evangelical. Hopefully people know. I mean, like more like super conservative kind of stuff that they are a little bit different beliefs on. And then Crossway. So where I met Christian, actually, some of the other guests of people are here a lot on our show or on Systematic Ecology, the podcast we do. So I made a lot of good connections to ministry too. I like that idea.
Yeah. So
Josh,
do you have stealing that idea? Do you have one, Greg? Can we see this next?
I think so. This one would be kind of an out of the box way of looking at it, but it might be kind of a fun thought. I'm a real lover of liturgy, and that is a word that means the work of the people. It's what they do in worship. But I think it would be a fun thing to explore. What are some natural liturgies that people do outside of the church context? So like, what are some natural rhythms that are the work that people are doing together, formally or informally, that in some way could be understood as worship? That there is some worship connection going on with the work that people are collaborating to do.
See, that is fun. Also, my brain just being my brain, I mean, he's like, we could call it natural connections, and then I could use a bunch of like nature sounding sounds for it. And I just, I like thinking of like the production side. I was like, that's a fun one to produce. I like that idea.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
All right, sweet. So that's at least 2 more weeks for the show's longevity. Another thing that we're doing with every guest on the series is we're playing First Thoughts. I need both of you to pick a number, 1 through 26, and I'm gonna give you that many words. You're gonna have to tell me what.
They come up with a number together, and then they could alternate answering.
Oh, that could work. Yeah. I was gonna average their numbers.
Oh, that works too.
7. What's your number?
I was gonna say 8.
There we go.
Perfect. All right. We round up, so we're just gonna do 8. It's a little unfortunate, but that's just how math works. It's not my fault. So I say a word, you say the first thing that comes to your poetry. First thought.
Book.
Do we both get? Oh, sorry.
Can have the same thoughts.
Okay.
Inerrant.
God.
Mine's just kind of a sound. Just a aw.
Yeah, I get that. I get that a lot. Imago Dei.
Everyone is the image of God.
We're looking at it.
Dragon.
Fun.
Wings.
Banana.
Split.
Pass.
Banana pass. All right. Trinity.
Complicated.
Who has the time?
All right. Panda.
Also fun.
Always.
Beowulf.
Long.
Peace.
All right. First thoughts kind of hard. A lot of my first thoughts are just kind of concepts. A lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You think an image is too much for that game, I feel like.
Yeah.
See, my brain's simple. That's easy for me. It's like dragon, roar, next.
Yeah. Well, so the first thing he says Beowulf, and I say bark because it's not.
My brain's just too simple. I just literally, whatever first thing pops in my head, I'll just say it.
Yeah. When someone tells me Beowulf, I'm like thinking through Beowulf in my head.
It's the plot and the way that.
Trip Fuller was on last week, and he's just like, all those connections that happened between Tolkien's works. And I'm like, that's too much thought for your first thought. Your first thought should be simple. But Trip is a crazy intellect. So I'm just not surprised when he says that. So one thing that's really interesting with marriage that I wanted to talk about, and a lot of this I didn't really know growing up, but because I grew up in a Pentecostal church and we just kind of were what we were and we didn't learn too much about church history, honestly. But the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church teach marriage as a sacrament. It's one of the 7 sacraments. Martin Luther was one of the first to kind of split away from that type of thinking. He would not call marriage a sacrament. I think for some reason, I think Martin Luther had 3, but I know Baptist Eucharist. Was there another one that he held to? Or was it just the 2?
Almost.
Right. He was on the fence about confession.
Okay.
Ultimately, we did not make that one.
2.5.
Yeah.
All right. So what can you guys tell us about your church's, or I guess my church's view, the Evangelical Church, Lutheran Church's view, when it concerns what is the nature of marriage? If it's not a sacrament, is it ordinative? What would you consider marriage as far as the context of our religion?
So acknowledging that there's more than one way of understanding a sacrament, but I would just put out there how we understand sacraments, and that is something that Jesus says people ought to do in Scripture, and it's something that extends some measure of salvation to the people who partake in it. And so for Luther, pretty clearly, baptism and the Eucharist would be two things that Jesus talks about, two things that confer salvation and something that is redemptive to the people who partake in it. And that's not to say, that the other five that some people understand to be sacraments are bad or anything like that. It's just that it doesn't quite meet those qualifications. And so that's why he was kind of on the fence with confession, because when we confess something we've done wrong, we are saying where we are in error and we are receiving absolution. And hearing that word of forgiveness is very much like something that is redemptive and something that saves us. So he kind of waffles there in some readings. But when it comes to marriage, we understand that to be something different. We understand marriage to be a covenant. That is a promise that we make in the presence of God and in the presence most often of other people. And a biblical covenant has tremendous blessings for those who enter into them. But it's more than a promise. It's an ongoing relationship that begins, and one that's grounded in faith, trusting that God will bless through the relationship that's entered into both people. And also that everyone who's gathered around is going to take part in that blessing, as well as take part in when that relationship is difficult. So marriage is ultimately between two people. Certainly, we as pastors in weddings, we show up not performing anything special by religious standards, really just by the state, that we are the ones who make it legal if the couple hasn't done that already. We're there to bear witness to the covenant that they make with one another. A couple marries one another. What have I missed?
Well, I think you got a lot of good things there. Good points made. I think, we do premarital counseling meetings as part of the work that we do with couples before they get married. And that's because, we're entering into a covenant. It's important to understand what you're promising. This is not something that we take lightly. And again, if you want to be married in the church, in faith, we want to talk about what that means, where God comes in your relationship, how your faith will play into your relationship, and the community that will be surrounding you. Because that is being the church, is being with each other in good times and bad times. We promise in baptism to lift one another up in faith and support one another throughout our life in the journey of faith. So we want to make sure that we've covered those things before we get into marriage.
Yeah, no, I like that. Mm-hmm. All right. So the other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of times in church culture, I don't say the church, I'll say church culture, we kind of hear about marriage or learn about marriage like it's the end goal for relationships. Whenever you're dating, think about like high school years, college. So you got to get married, and that's the whole purpose of dating, that's the whole purpose of all this. That's like the end goal. So I'm just curious, after getting married, how has the church supported you both in your relationship and maybe in creating new goals?
You can start that one.
You go first.
That's an interesting question. And one that I don't know that I have a great answer to. I think
I don't know the fine answer.
I think we are unique in being a clergy couple. And so that dynamic is a little different in terms of like relationship to congregation is a little different. But I do know our council, which is the kind of governing board of our congregation, which we are a part of, but they are very encouraging to us to take our time off to make sure that we're prioritizing our family. And I do appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah, and I think I love this question because I think it really gets at the whole idea of why you would be married specifically in a church. And that's the thing that we tell couples when we're working with them as pastors is we say, you don't need to do this here. You could do the most recent couple I worked with was for a blessing of their marriage that they had already done at the UPS store. Perfectly fine, perfectly legal. But then they wanted to share with their family, and that makes it a little bit different. And so that's why, we convened this gathering, and we had this opportunity for them to make promises, to enter into a covenant together in the sight of everyone else, in part so that gathered community could support them moving forward. And so how has the church supported us? I don't know that it has, but I don't know that we gave it a chance to, because we didn't get married in the congregations where we were members. We got married in the congregation where you had grown up, and so we're not with that community all the time.
Right.
Well,
really ever, because, they worship on Sundays and we live here and do church here. It is an interesting idea. I don't want to cut you off. Because, when we make promises as the church, as a congregation, we make them on behalf of the whole church. Like when we baptize children and we say, people of God, do you promise to support this child? And we all say we do. And that promise transfers wherever you go. Another congregation also has that commitment because we make it on behalf of one another. And so it is a very interesting question of, even if you move from the place where you had your ceremony, how does the support of the church travel with you?
And how are we supporting other people?
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a gut check question in a really good way,
right? Because we are the church as well, and I don't know that we're doing anything particular
as a church body.
To do that. Yeah,
it needs to be like school records. You need to have your church record, and they just send that with you.
Yes, well, they do. We do have that. We transfer people, and that you get all the information goes with you.
Right. I'm so smart. So
many churches know so much about you, TJ. I've been sending your record everywhere.
You start sending my resume instead. So what challenges or blessings have you both found in marriage that you maybe weren't expecting?
I think a challenge that is also a blessing is growing. You think you're a fully formed person when you're getting married. And even though, we were 26 when we got married, and so our frontal lobes were fully formed, there's still plenty of growing to do, and growing together, and being married is different than being engaged and dating, and it's a different thing. And it's interesting to find out things that you thought were normal things, and when compared to others, they're like, oh, that's odd, actually. That's a weird thing that you're doing. And kind of having to dig into what that is, and why that's happening, to develop better skills, to be healthier in a relationship, to, learn how to disagree and do so in a way that results in growth, and strengthening the relationship rather than breaking it apart. So those things are really, well, in my experience, those things can be quite hard, but are also quite valuable and very important for healthy growth in my own self and then in our relationship. It's a blessing to get to spend my life with my best friend. And that's really such a gift. So Yeah. Now you say something nice.
I want to real quick though. I gotta double down on that. The weirdness thing. I love that. So I think that's something that needs to be talked about more before people get married. Because until you join families with someone else, you see their family, but you're not a part of their family. Once you're a part of someone else's family and you start trying to figure out what family traditions carry over or not, that's when you really see how weird your family has been.
Right.
I had no idea. My family are. Sorry if they're listening. I love you guys. We're freaks.
I could have told you that forever ago.
No.
I didn't know.
But it's true of all of us. And I think it's something that I noticed a lot more, even outside of the context of marriage. But it's interesting to be sitting here and talking about how we understand marriage, and even just to be sitting in this room. We used to do a coffee hour during the pandemic using this same basic setup. And it was such an eye-opening experience. y'all are far beyond this now with the work that you do, but just to see oneself on camera and not, if you're not accustomed to it, all the little things that you do that you didn't realize you do is really quite eye-opening. And marriage is an opportunity to have someone training the lens on you kind of all the time. Not in a scrutinizing way, but it certainly does help you see more of yourself by hearing what someone who is nearest to you happens to notice.
Yeah. For me, it was hearing my own voice. Not a fan of that.
No, I don't love watching stuff back.
Yeah.
See, I don't mind my own voice as much, but especially earlier in the podcast, whenever I just refuse to listen or watch our earlier stuff, and I'm sorry for people who do. I just touch the desk so much, so frequently.
Interesting.
And with the microphone back then being on the desk, it just was very evident.
Yep.
It was bad.
Been there.
Yeah.
Been there.
A lot of growth in our pod marriage. So, Francis Chan, future guest of the show, Francis Chan, writes about marriage as a means to witness and share God's love. So in what ways do y'all think that it may be possible to reflect God's love in your marriage or to do God's work better through your relationship together?
You go ahead and start. I took the other one first.
Okay. I think the way that one can bear witness to God's love best through marriage is in the way that that as an institution, marriage calls us out of self-regard as the first thing we think about. And there again, it has something to do with that 24/7 aspect, that I might be really good and charitable at the office, or I might be really kind to my friend if we go out and have a couple of beers at a brewery or something like that. But then I get home and I can just, so now it can be about me. And every time we add an additional call to our lives, whatever that may be, whether it's marriage or it's being a parent or taking on some new role that's really integral to who we are adding in something else that competes with our just kind of our just fixation on self. And so I think we bear witness to God's love in that way, that we are pouring out more of ourselves for someone else. And then the beauty of marriage is you get to see the same thing in return. It's not some sort of just some sort of void that you're continually pouring yourself into and receiving nothing from, but there's reciprocity there, and it's sustaining and really life-giving.
Yeah.
I think just in terms of specifically us, in how does our particular marriage kind of reflect God's love or help with God's work, I think being a clergy couple in the same congregation is pretty rare. But I think it is a gift, at least I think we are a gift in that we create a really stable space, I think, because we're a team in a couple different ways. And so it's easier for us to be on the same page. We've got each other's backs, and that people see our relationship all the time. And so when we demonstrate care and consideration and respect to each other, I think that is an example of how God's love ought to be done in a relationship. And, I'm not perfect at that for sure. But I hope that I'm modeling that most of the time.
Yeah. Man. So I had a couple thoughts. One I'm just going to lay out there, then one I'm going to see what you guys think about. So one was, so Pastor Gregg, when you were kind of talking about like pouring out of yourself and how when you're single, you kind of go do your thing and then you come home and just be yourself, take off your shoes, whatever, undo. And I think what's interesting with the relationship is it's harder to do some of that because someone's literally constantly there. But also sometimes it's like a reflection of, you're like, man, I do spend just an unhealthy amount of time playing Kingdom Hearts. So it kind of makes me want to spend less time doing that stuff anyway. So it's like, yes, I'm pouring out of myself, but it's also like I'm able to look in the mirror a little bit easier and go, maybe I shouldn't be doing that much for myself anyway. I think the other thing was C.S. Lewis. Obviously, I got to bring up C.S. Lewis. It's just what I do for some reason. He writes The Four Loves, which everyone's surprised I'm bringing that up. In it, though, he talks about how all of our human loves are really, they can either become demons, and by us putting so much into them that they control our lives, or they can be a reflection of God's love. So kind of just seeing as how our relationships here, our marriage to one another, y'all's marriage to one another, me and my wife's marriage to one another, can actually be a reflection of that greater divine love. Is I don't know. I think that's an interesting part of this. Do you guys have anything that you would add to that, or how do you guys take that kind of thing that C.S. Lewis says?
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add to Lewis right there specifically, but I would say, when we hear people talk about how they are better people because they have become parents, they are better people because they have, because they married the person who was right for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's exactly what you're talking about, that given the opportunity, I would squander the gift of my time and my life by trying to fill something in me that I can't really fill on my own. That's not true for everybody, but that is true for me. And the gift of marriage, or like in our case, we don't have kids, but we have pets, is that it calls us out of ourselves so that we don't become so inwardly focused. That's Luther's description of sin, is turned in on ourselves, making ourselves God. And I think it just helps to cultivate a better balance and a better way of spending the gift of time that we have.
So singleness is often looked down upon in the church, yet St. Paul wrote that people should try to remain single in order to better focus on the ministry. And how do you both think that the church should approach the idea of singleness as a calling?
I think we definitely should approach singleness as a calling, as much as we see marriage as a calling, or parenting or not parenting. We are made in God's image. That was one of our words earlier, that we are made in God's image and we are diverse. This was the scripture on Sunday, was from Ephesians. And St. Paul was talking about how we are unified in the church, but we remain diverse. And so having different people live different ways, I think offers good different perspectives, different ways to connect to the world, that I think if we all lived exactly the same way would not actually be super helpful. And so I think we ought to see that as a calling. If you feel called to be single, then great. We feel called not to be parents. You can have to put it in a positive light, we are called to be child-free. And that relates to our call to being married and our call to being pastors. Because, we don't have our own children, but we spend a ton of time working with our children here. And so it would be a different kind of life that we might not be able to get to do as much of that if we had our own children. So having the specific call in a different way allows different people to do different things.
Yeah. And as much, let me think. So one of the things that I really appreciate is the way that a biblical narrative can highlight truth, even if it's just kind of an archetype story. And one of the things that I go back to is the story of Abraham and Sarah, and how Abram and Sarai are on this earth for quite a while before they are called to be parents. It's a reminder that what you are called to today, you may not be called to tomorrow. In the case of marriage, you've made a covenant that kind of cements that calling. In the case of being a parent, you don't stop being a parent, but some of the things God calls us to are temporal, and that's okay too. It's a way of understanding ourselves, needing to be open to where the Spirit would guide us to be, that God's will for us is revealed, unfortunately, one day at a time. And maybe fortunately, I don't know. Maybe it's good to be surprised sometimes. But I think that's kind of the way that I think about how things can change, and you can be faithful as they change. And I think it can be a real gift to be called to a solitary life. One has more time for other things. I do think there is danger in being distracted into self-interested pursuits that don't necessarily feed into self or the community. But that same danger is present in marriage, because if I come home at the end of the day and I feel like I'm spent, but I haven't poured anything into the relationship that we have, and we just kind of double down on unproductive conflict because I haven't nurtured my whole self, that's a risk that a single person wouldn't have. So I think the challenges are similar for all of us. They simply present a little differently.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, we at the beginning of the series, like we mentioned, part of why we're doing this, this is church unity, and this isn't very much like, oh, how do the church have different views, which is like what a lot of what we do is. But a lot of this is just how people are different stages, whether life or just in their walk with the Lord or whatever. And singleness, marriage. Singleness could be a temporary, could be a long-term calling. Marriage could be temporary, not because I think you might get divorced, but you're not guaranteed how long someone will live, So all of these things, just learning to be present, I still think is an important thing, which is ironically one of my big things during our What's Next series is just being present. So there's that. So one thing I did want to ask you guys while we had you, though, that's just more specifically about you two. A lot of people in and out of the church, you'll hear people say that you shouldn't work with family. So I was curious how you guys have been making it work and pursuing your careers together. And what's that like?
One thing I would note is we have a particular advantage in that regard, because when we first met one another, we were working together. We met at seminary, that's graduate level study. And so we had similar, all of the same classes, I guess.
At least until senior year. I think we had a couple electives different that year.
Yeah, mostly all of the same classes, struggling with the same kind of issues and bringing our unique gifts to those challenges. I think we figured out just kind of intuitively in that way how we could work together and be effective in collaborative efforts. And then when we were called to the same congregation, we figured out very quickly a system that worked for us, that we have different gifts, thanks be to God. And so where your gifts are strong, those are your areas. Where my gifts are strong, those are mine. And we don't step on one another's toes. We're good about staying in our lane. And I think if people can do that and have a common understanding of what their lanes look like, I think a lot more people could work together than maybe what they realize.
Yeah. I am trying to word this well. So there's like a 2-part question. So I because part of what's influencing this question is in the back of my mind. A lot of churches I grew up with, a lot of churches I know of have that kind of, the man's the head of the household and the woman kind of supports the man as kind of her role kind of thing, gender roles, which I think there's room to disagree on some of this stuff amongst the church. I'm trying not to sound like I'm belittling those ideas, but it's hard not to sometimes. But the just in the back of my head, and I'm just kind of curious, does anything about your role one to another affect what's funny is I don't even know if one of you is head pastor or the other one's associate pastor, or are you both just pastor? Does that make an impact, or how's that work?
So the way that calls work in the ELCA is it's like mutual interviewing, and it's a call. So you discern together where that's going to go, how that's going to go, and what your role is going to be. Here at Grace, they were originally looking just for one pastor and then later would look for another, but then determined that perhaps a clergy couple is a 2 birds, 1 stone, extra benefits situation. And so we got to interview here. And that was one of their questions for us as we had that conversation of discernment is, does one of you should one of you be the senior pastor? Which one should it be? They were very thoughtful to acknowledge that there's been sexism in that system, and that they were not saying, we want the man to be in charge, but very much wanted to know our opinions. And we do have a system. Pastor Gregg is the senior pastor here, and my title is pastor. And we did that for a couple reasons. One is Pastor Gregg has really great gifts for administration and leadership, vision, big picture stuff. He is excellent at that. And my gifts are different than that. So those gifts are needed in a senior pastor position. And also, it is important in our experience that you have a person where it's the buck stops here. It can be confusing if there's two people who are equally in charge. And so, when it comes, like you were talking about, when it comes to our different areas of ministry, I'm in charge of a variety of different things, and questions come to me. I help work out those situations, but ultimate stuff, it's you.
Well, and I think what's really important about that, at least, actually, I would say what's important about that in general, I was going to say maybe just for us, but I think in general, is when we have a collaborative structure. I'm the senior pastor, but a lot of that really just has to do with the ways that I relate to staff, so that people have a clear supervisor and they're not being supervised by multiple people. Right. But if someone were to ask me a question having to do with the youth group, with the learning program, the way that youth and family are doing their programs, the outreach ministries that we have, any of the things that are under Pastor Rachel, I may be the senior pastor, and that is utterly irrelevant because it's not under me. And so whatever question there is that has to do with the areas for which she is the lead, I step back entirely. And I think that's really important in any system, that there would be clear lines of communication and a clear sense of who's responsible for what. I think anyone who wants ultimate responsibility for everything and ultimate say on everything is probably kidding themselves with what their capacity actually is. None of us can do everything on our own.
Yeah. But you would say that decision was more made practically than because of some like underlying theology of gender norms or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. No. So the ELCA, as you mentioned, is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And the word evangelical has gotten kind of a difficult reputation, that in a lot of ways that it's used to mean more conservative, fundamental things. In the ELCA, it's just about evangelism is sharing good news. And so we are a church that shares the good news of God. And the ELCA is relatively progressive. We've been ordaining women for close to 55 years, I think. It was never a question to me whether I was allowed to be a pastor. I had a pastoral intern in third grade who was a woman. So as long as I can remember, we've had women. Now, I've encountered plenty of the other ideas that maybe women should not be pastors. But that was never a question in my mind, not in yours.
Yeah, and we're fortunate to have women in leadership roles that extend far beyond this congregation. The bishop of the synod is a woman, and the presiding bishop of the ELCA is a woman. And it's something we take pride in, frankly, that we don't hold gender roles to be determinative in terms of what people will do, just like Paul didn't. Right. In having deacons and people sent out to represent the teachings of Jesus on his behalf.
Yeah. No, and that's part of why I am now a member of the ELCA. It's something that's important to me. But this is the Whole Church Podcast. We're open to other people disagreeing and trying to kind of hold some of this in an open hand, as long as we're not actively being misogynist. That's like a big line for me, is I'm like, you're, in my mind, that's no longer part of the heart of Christ. And that's less a unity question and more of a, where is Jesus in this question? But no, I found it, I hope you don't mind saying, I got really encouraged. I had a fun time when Pastor Gregg actually went to my workplace at one point, not knowing I was going to be there, but he was wearing a pride pin because it was the month of June. And I could be like, hey guys, this is a queer affirming space. This is like the kind of church that we're a part of. And I got to kind of share about that and share the good news. So, that's kind of evangelicalism, I guess, at work.
Yes. Sure.
But it's good stuff. And the question of women and stuff in ministry is it's an interesting one, and I'm glad to be a part of church that I am. I know the one I grew up in allowed women to preach, but was a more conservative church. So you had some people who was questioning whether that should be allowed or not. And TJ is still part of that church. Yeah, that's how I throw it to you. Did you? Yeah, is that fun? Did you like that transition?
No, that was great. So, are there any other challenges that we might not have thought to ask that you'd like to talk about around the topic of marriage in the church and how that's handled?
You first.
Yeah, okay. I think, and I believe y'all are having a conversation about divorce soon. I think that we need to be removing the idea that divorce is worse than staying in a harmful situation. Divorce is not the worst thing. If you are in a marriage that has been broken, if you are in harm's way, if you're being abused, leave. I think that's as clear as I can be in those scenarios. God does not
Amen.
want that for you. God wants you to be loved and cherished and treated as such. And when someone breaks the covenant of treating you in that way, it's already broken and you are allowed to leave.
Yeah, I agree. And I would, maybe mine would kind of dovetail off that to say it doesn't even need to be, from my perspective, as dramatic as abuse. I think there is, this kind of goes back to how I think discernment is an ongoing process and something that we continually need to be assessing. And I don't think on our own, with guidance of trusted friends, trusted spiritual mentors, advisors, people who are partnering with us, to be asking questions of whether our current path is leading to something that's faithful to what God wants for us. Is it leading to our best selves? There are cases when people get married and perhaps maybe they were too, maybe because of the age at which they were married, they didn't really know themselves well enough, or they didn't take the time to have all of the conversations that would be helpful. That's one of the reasons why we always do premarital counseling. It's not because we want to get in anybody else's business. We want to make sure that people have had as many conversations as can be so that they know one another well, they know the backgrounds of each, and can have open and frank conversations identifying where the differences may be and know whether that's going to be a problem so that they're less likely down the road to find themselves in a relationship where it is not life-giving for them nor their partner. And I think when we get to the point where we're in a relationship and neither person is able to grow, then it may well mean they need to grow separately. And I think that can be the faithful decision to make, as difficult as it is, and acknowledging that it's no one's goal. But the ultimate goal, of course, is repentance for us all, that we would all be able to have our minds changed and expanded, and occasionally to be open to going in a new direction because of insight we've received. That insight is a blessing. And I think being open to it is fundamental to being good disciples, faithful disciples.
Yeah. And so I think all that, once we get to that idea of understanding relationships perhaps ending in that way, then we need to do a better job on the other side of that too, of supporting people who have experienced divorce, because I know a lot of people feel shamed in that scenario and perhaps will not go back to church because they feel like people are judging them. And that's not what we want. We want people to feel loved. They grew, they discerned. We want to mourn with them that things did not go the way anyone hoped, and also rejoice with them that there is something new coming.
What is Christianity if not that? The hope of God redeeming the things that broke. Yeah.
And that gets to that heart of being present, and something I feel like it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around. It's God is not only there in the good times. If we're going back to like marriage, God is there in health and sickness. He's there in all of those moments. And sometimes that includes spiritual health and spiritual sickness. Sometimes that includes marital health and marital sickness. And maybe when the marriage dies, God is still there. And just kind of learning how to be present with God, and even the bad moments can be important. I don't know, life-giving to be with God.
Yeah.
One final thing we like to do, just as we're wrapping up, before we wrap up, before we do any of that other stuff, we always like to ask our guests, if you had to provide a single tangible action, just something practical people could go do right now, something they could do that would help better engender church unity, what would it be?
I think that would be praying for curiosity. Because I think when we are curious about people, we learn more and understand better, and we can grow in connection. And if not perhaps connection, perhaps just compassion. And in that way, love each other a little better.
Yeah.
And some of this, I think the first thing that pops into my mind, it does depend on what you have access to in terms of information, but assuming that you have the capacity to do so, think of someone you miss and call them. Because I think the farther we go in life, we develop this repository of people from days gone by whose story seems to diverge from our own, and it gets forgotten, and eventually it's years and you realize you haven't thought of someone and they just pop into your head and you think, oh my goodness, I haven't even thought of it. I think there's something particularly powerful about the way that we are all in communion together as the people of God. And whether we are in the same congregation, the same town, the same stage of life, whatever the case, I think it's important that we are continually made aware of the ways that we're connected. And that can be as simple as thinking of somebody you miss and giving them a call, sending them a quick note, thinking about you today, miss you, something like that.
I like that. So what would change in the world around us if everybody just did that? Both things.
See, this is the thing that I think it would be a real gift if we all knew, each and every one of us, the impact we have made in the lives of other people and the way that we are held favorably in so many people's understandings. And I love to think of a world where that happens more. So I encourage it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have someone in mind that I'm going to message them as soon as we finish recording.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I already did that once today, but I'll do it again.
Good.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
So, before we wrap up, we like to ask everyone to share a moment where they saw God recently, whether that be a blessing, challenge, moment of worship, whatever it is. I always make Josh go first to give the rest of us enough time to think about our God moment. So, Josh, do you have a God moment for us?
Man, I have plenty. I'm going to compound a few into one big God moment. I had my car decided that I forget which, some thermostat in my car decided not to work. So I was unaware that my car was overheating, which was great. And my radiator had a leak. So that was fun. But while it was fixed, I was going to use my wife's grandmother. We have two other cars. We're going to use her grandmother's car. But it's completely not working now too. So that was exciting. So then while we're figuring both of those out, I mentioned part of this day before because this all happened in one day, but then it's just kind of piled on a little bit. I've been trying to figure out school stuff. Our dishwasher broke. The last remaining working car, the headlight went out on, so that was fun. It was a little thing, but just the last 2 weeks have been thing after thing, and just kind of challenge to remain in God and let be present, because not every moment is worrying about the car, worrying about that. There's still lots of good moments in the day, and trying to figure out how to be present in those without ignoring the problems, because still got to fix the cars.
Yeah,
I did fix one of the cars, so that's cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Still got another car to fix though.
Yeah, I go next for helping you guys. But for me, my God moment, it's probably honestly going to be I got to go spend some time with a friend that I haven't gotten to spend time with in a long time, and it was Josh. We just live further away, and we get too busy to hang out literally every week like we used to.
That was fun.
Yeah. You went to see
Also,
Deadpool.
I made that my God moment last week, but you weren't here.
Yeah, I wasn't here, so it still counts for me.
Yeah.
There it goes. Nice.
Yeah.
Very good.
So, good way to cheat, just to be absent for a week. I used to get out of doing schoolwork. So, Gregg, Rachel, do you each have a God moment for us this week?
I do. You know?
Yeah.
Okay. So this past Sunday was the Sunday before school started for our school districts. They start on Thursday. And when that time rolls around, we like to do a blessing for those going back to school, those supporting school. And also, I wanted to take this Sunday as an opportunity to kind of offer blessings to everybody, because who can't use a blessing? And so what we did was we got these little stone crosses that had little loops, so you could then attach them to your backpack or your purse or your briefcase or whatever, and just a ton of different ones so that they could go pick out whichever one they wanted that spoke to them, with a little blessing card to remind everybody that you are beloved, and that, you know, your grades or your presentations or your projects do not define who you are. And I wasn't sure if the adults would really get into that, or if it was like, oh no, that's for the kids. But as I was greeting people after worship, I glanced over to that table and saw multiple generations gathered around, picking out their crosses and talking and laughing. And it was just really delightful to see people gathered together in blessing.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's real cool.
So if you enjoyed the episode, or if you hated the episode,
Pastor Greg hasn't got to do it.
Oh, right. I forgot. I'm used to doing like 3 people at a time. All right.
All right. Yours better be good.
All right. Well, I was going to get skipped in a part of a podcast I was on. Right when
that is a challenge, yeah.
Oh, right.
It's God's fault.
Sorry. So in the last, it hasn't even been a week yet. We had you can call it a funeral, a celebration of life, whatever the case. We had a service for a man, Harry. He was our oldest member. He was 98 years old. And very often, unfortunately, kind of the other side of the gift of all that longevity is when people who are that old die, the funerals tend to be kind of sparse. The attendance, I mean, because so many of the people who knew the best are gone. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we had it at the retirement community where he lived, and it was packed because it was people who knew him and got to know him, particularly in the last 5, 6, 7 years, who knew him as the gift that he was and got to celebrate that and share stories about him. And that's just because that's so different than the way things can sometimes turn out when we're gifted with having that many years of life. It was so fitting for him. And it was such an important reminder of the gifts of community and being together. And I don't think I'll probably go 98 years, but it did reinforce for me the importance of being a part of a community, wherever you are, however you find it, and letting yourself be a gift to other people the way he so clearly did.
Man, praise God.
That's great.
I can't believe you're trying to skip that, DJ.
I would never. It was part of the bit. But
right.
If you liked the episode, if you hated the episode, share with a friend, share with an enemy, cousin. We take all kinds, really, as long as it's because you recommended the show to them. So come hang out with us in our Discord. It's the easiest way to get in touch with us, probably, unless you already know us in person. Actually, I'm going to change that. If I know you in person and you want to ask me about the show, it better be on Discord.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah.
I don't check my text. So if you're not wanting to write me an email, you pretty much got to get me on Discord, because I'm terrible at texting.
Yeah, Josh doesn't actually know how to read. He Discord reads them to him.
Wait, how do I email?
It's the same program.
Okay. Yeah.
Highlight it and Google reads it.
My computer the letters are large enough that I bother to read it. It's really what it is.
Yeah. He has one of those like paper screens where the little braille bumps show up on his screen, so he just gets to.
I don't think that's okay. So check out other shows on Amazon Ministry Podcast Network. If you want to hear shows that we are aligned with, you can hear Let Nothing Move You, Why I Don't Like. I have my other show, Dummy for Theology. I have no idea what fallacy I'm on by the time this comes out, because we're recording pretty early, but I'm doing logical fallacies over there, so check it out. It's a fun time. Yeah.
So, and we do hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we're going to have Jake Dobrins talk with us about ministry or just life after divorce. And then Brandon Knight and Will Rose will be on to discuss what's next after feeling a call into, I don't know why, I just had my eyes just stopped working for a second. But we're going to discuss what's next after feeling a call into ministry or going into seminary. And after that, we're going to be discussing with Joe Day about what's next after a major split in ministry leadership. And at the end of season 1, Francis Chan is going to be on the show.
He doesn't know, though, so someone tell him.
Blissfully unaware. Yeah. Once someone gets to a certain level of fame, the unpaid appearances get a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast, a proud Anazao Ministries podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and would consider sharing it with a friend, enemy, or cousin. Again, remember, you can always sponsor our show on Patreon, Captivate, or on Apple Podcasts.